On January 20th, Donald Trump entered the White House with a full agenda.
The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Everyone is listening to you now. You came by the tens of millions to become part of a historic movement, the likes of which the world has never seen before.
On the eve of his 100th day in office, we examine his presidency so far. He has signed controversial executive orders on immigration, the environment, and the economy. He placed a new Supreme Court justice on the bench.
The American people, I am humbled by the trust placed in me today. I will never forget that to whom much is given, much will be expected.
And Trump took military action against Syria.
It is in this vital national security interest of the United States to prevent and deter the spread and use of deadly chemical weapons.
But opposition to his agenda continues on Capitol Hill, in the streets, and in the courts. Tonight on KQED Newsroom, the first 100 days of the Trump administration and its impact on California. Hello and welcome. I'm Thuy Vu. Tonight on KQED Newsroom, we bring you a special one-hour program about the first 100 days of the Trump administration. We'll talk with Californians who voted for Trump to get their assessment. And we'll get a snapshot from different parts of California from KQED reporters around the state. Plus, we'll hear from people who have become politically active for the first time since Trump took office. But first, I talk with California Congressman Adam Schiff. Schiff is the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. He played a key role in calling for an impartial probe into Russia's hacking of the presidential election, leading to this revelation by FBI Director James Comey.
I have been authorized by the Department of Justice to confirm that the FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election.
And joining me now is Congressman Adam Schiff. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be with you again.
Well, Russia connections are continuing to make headlines in the first 100 days of the Trump administration, particularly about Michael Flynn, President Trump's former national security advisor. Do you think he broke the law by not disclosing payments he received in business dealings with Russia?
It certainly does look like an apparent violation of law, and I think there are three legal clouds now hanging over General Flynn. The first is whether he was legally entitled or even able to accept the payments that he did from foreign powers, from Russian entities, and from the Turkish government. The second is whether he violated the law by not reporting the receipt of these payments. So when he submitted his forms for his security check, where you are required to report contacts with foreign powers. And then finally, there's a question, of course, about whether any of the false statements that he may have made also subject him to legal liability. So I think there are a lot of legal concerns in terms of the general's conduct that may go into why the general has asked our committee for immunity. That is something that we wouldn't consider until we had reviewed all of the other witnesses and documents and determined, based on a proffer from General Flynn, whether his testimony would add value. We'd obviously want to talk with the Justice Department to make sure that their equities were considered, but I think there are a lot of legal questions now swirling around General Flynn's conduct.
How would you assess the performance of the Trump administration so far in the first 100 days, insofar as its impact in California?
Well, you know, to be candid, it's hard to imagine an administration off to a worse start from the California point of view than an administration that is running in the wrong direction when it comes to issues like climate change, where California has been a leader. The administration has been repealing the Obama Clean Power Plan, wants to go backwards in terms of fuel efficiency standards for vehicles, may walk away from the global climate agreement we reached in Paris that the United States helped lead that global effort. So on the environment, it's been disastrous 100 days. He's also thinking about repealing the establishment of some of the national monuments. When it comes to the immigrant families in our district and breaking up families, the far more aggressive deportation policies are a disaster. When it comes to our relations with our southern neighbor, the whole wall proposal is a disaster. Of course, the health care plan the Republicans have and the president supports would cut more Californians off of health care than any other state. So in each and every way, whether it's tax cuts, immigration, the wall, the environment, this administration couldn't be more hostile to the values that our state embodies.
President Trump this week released his tax reform plan. It includes massive tax cuts for corporations. What is your reaction to that plan?
Well, I have a couple of reactions. You know, it's certainly good for people like the president that have a big business and would benefit from that kind of a major tax cut for corporations and for very wealthy Americans. But the biggest problem is none of it is paid for. So it's all pie in the sky. It's all, well, we can give everybody a tax cut. We don't have to cut anyone's services, and we don't have to worry about our deficits and debt. Well, we already have a substantial deficit, a very substantial national debt. This will add potentially anywhere from $7 to $10 trillion to the national debt. So it's not so much a tax plan as it is a kind of a wish list of what the president would like to do to his wealthy benefactors or for his wealthy benefactors and for his own family. But it doesn't offer much for Americans, and for people in California in particular. It would really hurt us in a couple ways. It would hurt us because they're going to do away with the deduction for state and local taxes, meaning states like California that provide a lot of services will have to cut those services because the states won't get that kind of benefit anymore. And when you add that to the health care reform proposal the Republicans have, it means we'd be cutting millions off of Medicaid in California. We'd be cutting millions out of the exchanges that have pre-existing conditions who couldn't afford coverage. And the states would be in an even worse position to provide any backfill support because of this tax cut plan of the president. So for California, terrible news all around.
Also, I wanted to turn to foreign policy now with you and ask about North Korea and the rising tensions there. What tools do we have in our diplomatic arsenal right now to contain the North Korean threat?
Well, the most important one that we have is our ability to use our leverage with China. We don't have that much leverage anymore with North Korea. We already sanctioned them, at least directly, in as many ways as we possibly could. But there are other steps that we can take to impress upon China, which provides this lifeline, this safety valve for North Korea to clamp down on the North if it's going to continue with its nuclear and missile program. So there's a lot the Chinese can do that they haven't been willing to do. And to the degree we impress upon China that, look, if you don't take these steps, we're going to have to do things for our own national security and that of our allies that you're not going to want to see. We're going to have to increase our military and naval presence in the region. We're going to have to be more aggressive in terms of our implementation of theater missile defense, which we're now starting to implement in South Korea. And we're going to impose secondary sanctions, meaning we're going to sanction Chinese banks for doing business with North Korea. These are kind of steps that the Chinese do not want to see happen, but I think if we explain these are going to be necessary, it may motivate the Chinese to do a lot more. That's still no guarantee that the Chinese can get North Korea to back off, but we do need to explore every lever we have because the military options are just so awful.
All right. Congressman Schiff, thank you so much for being with us.
You bet. Thank you.
Still ahead, we will hear from people who have become politically active for the first time since Trump was elected. But right now, for a different look at President Trump's first 100 days in office, we turn to KQED senior editor for politics and government, Scott Shafer.
And joining me now are Republican National Committeewoman from California, Harmeet Dhillon, longtime Republican political consultant Sean Walsh, and San Francisco Chronicle politics reporter Joe Garofoli. Welcome to all of you.
Thanks.
I want to begin by asking about something we just heard Adam Schiff talk about, and that is sort of the California penalty, noting that a lot of the president's policies on the environment, health care, immigration, the new tax plan seem to be singling out California for additional punishment. Sean, what do you think of that notion?
Well, I don't think it's singling out California for punishment, but California always wants to have it kind of my way. They almost act like they're an independent state. So I remember when Governor Wilson was governor, you had a number of folks who said, well, California can't have its own immigration policy. The federal government has that exclusive right and responsibility. Now it's 180 degrees different. So the truth of the matter is California wants a lot and asks for a lot and acts like it's its own independent state, but it's not being punished. It just has policies that are somewhat out of the mainstream and the policies that Donald Trump articulated when he was running for office.
Harmeet, what do you think? Is there an element of payback to any of this in terms of, look, you know, you guys gave Hillary Clinton 4.3 million more votes than I got? Here you go.
Not at all. I mean, every Republican I know and a lot of declined state voters and some Democrats are very much anticipating and looking forward to law and order returning to California. The immigration, failure to enforce our immigration laws is a big problem for safety and security.
But what about the tax plan? Because that in particular, and I realize it's just one-page piece of paper and it's not implemented.
It's a recently floated one-page piece of paper. I seriously doubt that there was a lot of analysis that went into it with regard to that one aspect, which is the deduction of the state income taxes, and I'm sure that there are going to be a number of refinements. We have a lot of members of Congress from California who, from both parties, who will have a lot to say about that. So it's a draft. I don't see it as some kind of penalty.
Joe, what about you? Just politics?
Oh, well, California's treating it like it's a penalty. They're setting up their own sanctuary state. They're even talking about setting up their own sanctuary cannabis state to deal so California can have its own cannabis laws and push back on the federal intrusion to those. Yeah. So it's definitely politics, and it you know. It's good for politicians here to
well, certainly Adam Schiff has benefited
to be aggrieved.
From it.
Yeah, he gets some airtime on it.
That's the way the states in the South acted with regard to the slavery issue as well. And so there are limits to this concept of federalism, and the federal government does have exclusive jurisdiction over some areas of our laws, and California needs to respect that.
So Scott, what Adam's not saying though is, so California has huge companies that have hundreds of billions of dollars offshore.
Apple, Google.
If we repatriate that money to the United States, Apple, Google, and all of these companies are going to bring that money back to California, and California is actually going to have a windfall of tax benefits. So
taking a step back, big picture, here we are. It's almost 100 days of the Trump administration. One word for you that encapsulates the first 100 days.
Gorsuch.
Gorsuch.
Yes.
Okay. Sean?
Slow, steady progress. Not one word, but...
That's not one word. Joe?
Chaos.
Chaos. So I'm wondering, you know, there have certainly the Gorsuch nomination to the Supreme Court, big success. Everyone would agree with that. He has done a lot of the things he said he would do on immigration and environmental regulations and so on, and yet his approval ratings are very low. And I'm just wondering, why do you think he hasn't been able to move beyond his base in terms of what people think about him and support, whether they support him or not?
Well, he's not yet learned that governing is different than campaigning. Fantastic campaigner, as we saw. But, you know, he didn't come in with, you know, he makes these pronouncements, but there hasn't been the policy behind them, whether it be Syria, which was well received on both sides of the aisle, but what's our Syria policy? You know, he violated Politics 101 by bringing the Affordable Care Act vote, or halting that.
But was that him or was that Paul Ryan?
Both. He has to own that too. And Reince Priebus should know better, and Ryan should know better. They have both houses of the Congress. This is their time to act, and they're not doing it.
Yeah. What would you add to that, Sean? Because, you know, some of it is, you know, Joe said he violated all the rules, but he's been doing that all along. And people keep waiting for the laws of gravity to apply, and they don't seem to apply to him.
So my abuse of the one-word rule here. Number one, he only has his cabinet secretaries in place. So I've been back in Washington the past 2 weeks. It's almost a ghost town around the executive offices. The assistant secretaries and deputy secretaries have not been appointed and put into, or have been appointed, but not confirmed and put into place. So I think you'll see progress on that issue. The one area I think that I have concern about is that Mr. Trump is going to have to work with the members of Congress on the Republican side and get legislative successes. It is critical that those two elements work together because the clock is ticking. When you go into next year, you are going to be looking at a re-election cycle and everything changes.
Has he squandered a honeymoon? Because typically it's the first few months where you can get a lot done because your popularity is high, people are giving you the benefit of the doubt, your political power is maybe at its peak.
But he's not playing by any of the traditional rules, and I agree with both of the other speakers here that if it could come from his mouth and directly to his base and, you know, sign it like the executive orders, then that's gone very well. That part where he's able to exert his will over the jurisdiction that he has. But where dealing with Congress is a predicate to getting things done, I think that's where the team has got some ways to go.
But on the executive orders, you know, the first travel ban was struck down. The second one was as well. And he didn't run it really by the agencies that were affected, Homeland Security and so on. Even, I think, Reince Priebus didn't read it. I mean, so is that a failure of sort of just being coordinated, or is it a rookie mistake? Is it his temperament? I mean, what accounts for that sort of beginning?
What accounts for that beginning is I'm not sure how many people actually thought that Mr. Trump was going to win. He ran an unconventional campaign that was very small, so he didn't have these very large teams in place that then get pulled up and put into administrations, even his White House team. So I just don't think he had the personnel and people around him to implement what he wanted to do. And I think he rushed to try and execute things that he said, I'm going to do it on day one. Well, you say day one, but you need to have your act together, your policy in order, and your fact sheets done. And they just threw it all out there, and it was easy to get mashed up in a blender.
Yeah, and day 100, he doesn't have number 2, number 3, number 4, or number anything in the Department of Justice. So the lawyers who are arguing and processing the defense of all of these important issues are either legacies from Obama administration or they're career officials who don't share the views of the president. And that shows in the lawyering.
But he's also, like in the State Department, said, oh, there's a bunch of jobs I'm not going to fill at all because we don't need them.
Well, and that appeals to the base. Less government is more. But you have to also have enough team players to get stuff done. The thing is, he made 103 promises during the campaign. He's kept 6 so far, and none of them had to do with the cooperation of Congress. So he has to, link arms. But let's face it, he's a guy who's come from spent his career as a family-owned business with no board pushing back against him. There's nobody who's pushing back against him now. And he has to learn to play in the sandbox of other people. He hasn't doing that.
Yeah. Mentioned California at the beginning with Adam Schiff, and whether or not is he taking it out on California. There was also a $650 million grant for Caltrain electrification that got yanked back. What about that? Is that not punishing the state or punishing Jerry Brown?
Well, it got more yanked back, actually, from Republicans in Congress who don't think we should have the high-speed rail, and that's an effective use of the money. So I wouldn't conflate that as punishment for California. They just don't like that policy, and they don't want to see the federal government on the hook for tens of billions of dollars, which will probably be over a $100 billion train when it's all said and done.
It's also exposing regional differences in California, because Devin Nunes told us at the convention, he's like, why doesn't Silicon Valley pay for that? They have all those rich guys there. Why is that incumbent on the federal government to pay that? And so there's a little, you talk about payback, that's regional payback.
But he also ran on infrastructure, right? We haven't seen really any plan for infrastructure, which presumably would include things like
I think
rail.
There's a legitimate concern by any sane person looking at the way California has run its finances. Yesterday, the UC System slush fund is an example that, can you trust California with money? Will I give them money for this? And maybe not looking at the fine details. And will it go into some other pocket of some silly pie-in-the-sky project like the high-speed rail project that Democrats and Republicans have concerns about?
Many would say, go ahead, Sean. Yeah.
Well, to further add to that, California, as part of their health care, put 4 million people on Medi-Cal. 4 million. And so they are now putting forward...
But it's also a very stable exchange.
Well, let's see when the bills come due, and the fact that the federal government, as it phases out or ramps down how much money they're going to give to the state of California. Plus, they're putting forward a single-payer initiative. That last time that Mr. Leno put a similar bill forward, the Department of Finance scored that at the $250 billion cost.
Well, and Jerry Brown has already indicated he's not going to sign that.
Yeah, but also those folks who are on Medi-Cal, the Medi-Cal expansion, a lot of those folks are in Trump counties that he won. He could be eating his own political seed corn if those folks suddenly lose their health care and they're like, well, wait a minute, what happened? I voted for you.
With something else. I mean, obviously, I think the president acknowledges that, and frankly, a lot of conservatives have taken issue with the president's details about wanting to satisfy all of these concerns. But I think we're going to see something else. I don't think it's fair to say that the current situation here in California is stable. I mean, I don't hear anybody who's happy with it.
Really quickly, going forward, what would you like to see change, Sean?
What would I like to see change?
Yeah.
I'd like to see get staffed up, and I'd like to see a methodical execution on the policies that he articulated when he was running for office. Don't rush to the party. Get it done, and you don't have to get it all in one bite. He's got 4 years and possibly 8 years. Do it in a slow, methodical way. After 4 years, you'll have success.
All right. Well, we'll be back after the next 100 days and see how we're doing. Thank you all very much. Sean Walsh, Harmeet, Dhillon, and Joe Garofoli. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Immigration has been one of the biggest issues for this administration so far. Here's a timeline of key events. On day 8, Trump signed an executive order to clamp down on travel from several countries in the Middle East. It ignited a weekend of protests at airports around the country. On day 21, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled to block it. Trump threatened to take the case to the Supreme Court, but instead later issued a revised version of the travel ban. Another executive order to cut off federal funds for sanctuary cities was challenged by San Francisco and Santa Clara County. On day 95, a federal judge knocked down that order. For many people, Donald Trump's election was a turning point, one that inspired them to get more involved in politics to make their voice heard. I talked with one of those people, Eleanor Chang, who at the age of 60 found a new calling for political action, both online and on the streets. San Francisco retiree Eleanor Chang is a U.S. citizen who never thought much about politics.
I have never been politically active, being from Hong Kong. We were told as youngsters not to be political of anything, right?
But Donald Trump's election changed everything for her. For the first time, she felt she had to publicly stand up for the values she treasures.
As a student from Hong Kong to come to the United States, I felt like I had a wonderful opportunity to get a good education, establish a very good career, build a family, and I felt very lucky to be a U.S. citizen. And I feel like, as immigrants, we all help build America.
So at 60 years old, she headed to Washington, D.C. for her first political protest.
When I learned about the Women's March, I was so excited because I said, I have to go and be part of this.
So tell me about this photo here on your Facebook.
Okay, so this is my cousin and her daughter, the three of us, first-time marchers.
All
three of us, two generations with our pussy hats.
I love that.
And then here's a shot of this woman who gave me the poster after I admired it.
And what was it about that poster that you liked so much?
You can see her hair was just amazing, and then her looking up, and the expression, it's just a hope to me. It says hope.
Yeah, and also a strong message about women.
It was very uplifting.
After a long career in the banking industry, Chang says she's discovering a new passion, political activism.
I'm hoping that they will send a message to President Trump that his positions are not exactly what everybody is thinking, have in their minds, that he would listen to us and help us become more of a diverse and civilized society.
But if President Trump doesn't get this message, she feels she can still make a difference by empowering other women to find their own political voice.
So Emerge America has some really nice things about upcoming programs that they have going on.
It's really important for us to have a network of friends to continue to talk about the issues that we face, and then to also keep up the momentum and to cheer each other on to continue to resist. A lot of them, they're afraid of public speaking, and actually once they get trained, it's really not too bad, not that hard, right?
Exactly.
Because we do it.
Right.
This whole process let me think that I've been empowered to do something that I believe in, that I could be active and I could engage and I could tell people about it. And I'm really excited that I found that in myself to be able to be politically active. It will never be too late, even at 90.
As people like Eleanor Chang were protesting loudly around the country, another clash was quietly mounting as attorneys began filing complaints and lawsuits. The steady stream of court challenges has placed lawyers on both sides and judges at the forefront of policy in the first 100 days of this new administration. Joining me now with analysis is UC Berkeley Interim Dean of the Law School, Melissa Murray. Melissa, good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
President Trump has a broad agenda. We've seen lots of demonstrations, but at the end of the day, it seems like the people at the forefront of this fight against the president's proposals are the attorneys.
It's been a great day for law schools. Lots of things are happening. Every new administrative effort seems to spark some kind of legal response. And lawyers have been right there, even lawyers from my own law school alumni of UC Berkeley. So it's been really energizing, I think, for the legal field, but also a bit exhausting. It's been nonstop for the last 100 days.
So legal challenges to presidents aren't anything new, right? We saw that in the Richard Nixon era. His fight to keep his Oval Office tape recording secret went all the way to the Supreme Court. We've seen the Obama administration's immigration rules facing court challenges. What is different this time?
Well, what's different about this time is it seems to have started immediately at the beginning of a presidential administration, and it doesn't seem to have let up at all. So it's only been 100 days, but there's been so much to talk about, and lawyers have been at the forefront of all of it. So from the travel ban to the Neil Gorsuch nomination to the plans to defund Planned Parenthood, this is nonstop legal action, and it's all been really interesting to follow, but again, really exhausting. It's a lot to handle, and we still have 1,300 days left.
So speaking of the travel ban, the attorneys that brought those challenges scored a victory, but there are some other suits out there. And do they possibly face tougher hurdles? For example, I'm thinking of the one that the group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington has filed. It basically has to do with the emoluments clause, charging that the president's failure to sell his business interests really put them in a blind trust actually violates the Constitution. How tough are the hurdles for that type of lawsuit as opposed to an immigration ban challenge?
Well, so in every lawsuit, there are two big issues. One, procedurally, does this lawsuit belong before a federal court? Are the plaintiffs the right plaintiffs to bring the case? And then the substantive issues, like on the merits, does this violate the Constitution? Here, before we even get to the merits question, we have to determine whether or not the plaintiffs are the right plaintiffs to be bringing this. And the public interest group Crew that you mentioned has brought this suit, but immediately face a question about whether or not they have standing as plaintiffs because they are not directly harmed by the president's refusal to put his interests in a blind trust. They've amended their lawsuit to include a group of restaurants and other hotels, but they still face something of a hurdle on the standing question because even though these groups might be able to claim an injury due to the president's failure to put his interests in a blind trust, there are still questions about whether or not this can be traced directly to the receipt of an emolument and then whether it's redressable by a federal lawsuit. So there are a lot of standing questions in that suit, but again, it raises broader awareness of the emoluments clause, about violations to the emoluments clause. And again, that just puts the administration in the hot seat.
Let me ask you about the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals as well. The rulings halting the two different versions of the travel ban both ended up in the Ninth Circuit Appeals Court. And this week, in an interview with the Washington Examiner, President Trump said that he has absolutely considered proposals to break up the Ninth Circuit, carve it out, make it smaller. How serious is that threat?
Well, he's not the first president to talk about breaking up the Ninth Circuit. It's the largest circuit in the country. It's headquartered here in San Francisco, but it takes on all of the western states. So everything from Montana and Idaho to Alaska, Hawaii, and California, Arizona. It's massive. 9 West Coast states and 2 U.S. territories. It's a massive court. It also hears quite a large volume of cases. The charges have always been that it's famously liberal, but it hasn't really been that liberal in recent years. So President Carter appointed a number of nominees who were famously liberal, but in recent years, President Clinton has appointed the largest number of judges to that court, and then President Obama and President Bush have also appointed members, and they're more moderate than they used to be, for sure. So the idea that this is a left-leaning court, that's changed a lot, I think, over the last couple of years, and it's much more moderate. Still, the idea that it is a liberal court lives on. And again, this particular imposition on the Ninth Circuit that President Trump has raised is sort of around the idea of politics, that this is a court that he will not get a fair hearing in because it is so liberal. And lots of other people have made that claim, but it's very hard to break this up. You have to get congressional approval, has to go through Congress. And many judges have even said this would not make sense to break this up. Well, the natural splitting of this particular circuit doesn't seem that natural at all. And the last time we had a circuit split like this was when the Fifth Circuit, which included a lot of southern states, including Texas, Florida, Georgia, split into 2 different circuits, the 11th Circuit and now the 5th Circuit.
What year was that?
It was back in the 1980s.
Oh, it's been a while, all right. And just real quickly, you alluded to this, that people have accused the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of basically being activist judges. So we have Neil Gorsuch in place now on the U.S. Supreme Court, and some of these challenges may end up in the Supreme Court at some point. With the court's current makeup, how do you expect that to play out in the system of checks and balances?
Right, so when Justice Scalia died, the court was sort of in equipoise with maybe 5 on one side, 4 on the other, or sometimes Justice Kennedy might come in to be a split vote, the swing justice. I don't think that has really changed. Okay. Neil Gorsuch takes on Justice Scalia's seat as a conservative. What I think you will see, though, is perhaps in these rulings a more extreme position. We don't really know as much about Justice Gorsuch as we do about Justice Scalia. We'll hear more over time. But one thing we do know is that he is perhaps more deferential to presidential power than his predecessor. And so I think in cases like this, that will be really important.
Okay, much to watch. Melissa Marie, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And later in this program, we'll get an update from reporters from around the state. But up next is KQED politics and government reporter Marisa Lagos with a look at why some Bay Area voters supported Trump and how they feel about him now.
President Trump has proposed massive tax cuts and pushed for more business-friendly regulations. I sat down with 3 Bay Area women who voted for President Trump to get their impressions of the first 100 days and their hopes for the future. Joining me now are UC Berkeley student Claire Chiara, California Director of African Americans for Trump, Corinne Rankin, and Alameda County Republican Chair Sue Caro. Welcome to the show, ladies, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So to start off, I'd just like to ask each of you a little bit about why you supported Trump and what your impressions have been this first 100 days. And Sue, I'd love to start with you.
Well, I'll be perfectly honest. I didn't vote for Donald Trump during the primary. He's an unconventional candidate, an unconventional situation. I didn't think he was going to win. But when we got to the general election, there was no choice to me. I didn't like Hillary Clinton at all. It was going to be Donald Trump. Okay. So I voted for Donald Trump.
And so far, are you happy with him?
I'm happier than I expected to be, frankly.
Really?
Yeah, I think he's doing some very good things. And I think we didn't see this side of Donald Trump as much during the campaign. The kinds of management skills he brings to the table, how he listens to people, some of the good picks he's making for his cabinet and to lead agencies and so forth. So, yeah.
Claire, how about you? What kind of solidified your support for President Trump, and how would you evaluate these first couple months?
I really appreciated the fact that he was an outsider to national politics and politics at every level. I think that our government for many decades has been plagued by career politicians and bureaucrats that are simply out of touch with the needs and wants of everyday American families and workers. And so to rate his presidency so far, I think that the first 100 days have been really incredible in that they've lived up to the promises that he made during the campaign. He is absolutely committed to the same ideals that he claimed to be committed to during his campaign. And oftentimes we see a reversal once people get elected, and once they hold office, they flip-flop, and the people that supported them are left questioning, why did I vote for this person? I think that Donald Trump is living up to his promise to put America first in a variety of ways, and I absolutely stand behind that.
Corinne, you're a small business owner and a strong Donald Trump supporter, I think from the beginning,
yes,
right? So tell me, are you feeling the same way?
Absolutely. I feel Claire probably took the words out of my mouth. I was excited about his candidacy from the moment he announced that he wanted to run for president. I immediately just threw my support behind him. I liked a lot of the things that I heard during the campaign about putting America first. And as far as his first 100 days in office, I'm happy with what I've been seeing. He came in and hit the ground running, and he's sort of running it as a businessman and sort of running our country in an unconventional way, and I think it's working.
Yeah. So one thing you guys have all hit on is this idea that he's really playing to his base, and I'm just curious, as supporters in a very blue state, if that worries you at all, if you think he needs to have a broader message as he moves throughout his presidency. Corinne, is that something that concerns you?
No, I don't. I don't think that anyone in our country can have a problem with him saying that he wants to put America first. That's what any president of any country should be saying. I think we're not used to hearing it. But once I think people are starting to see him more presidential now versus on the campaign. I feel like I'm seeing the same person that I saw on the campaign, because I've always listened to what he said versus, the rhetoric from, other people's opinions.
Yeah. I'd like to know who his base is. I think that there's a false concept about who Donald Trump's base is. I certainly don't think that the media had a good idea about where the voters were going to come from who were going to vote for Donald Trump. They didn't get it during the campaign. They didn't get it on election night. Right. They haven't had it since he's been in office. So there was a very interesting article that was printed in Politico this week. And the title of it was, There is a Media Bubble, and It's Worse Than You Think. And I don't know if you saw it, Marissa. Yeah. And the idea was that the major media installations or organizations are clustered in the Boston to Washington, D.C. corridor and the West Coast from Seattle to Los Angeles and maybe around Chicago. But they're missing a whole lot of what's going on in America. And clearly, they didn't see Donald Trump coming.
So I'm curious about that, because one issue that's come up a lot is coal jobs, and which is clearly important for some people in Donald Trump's base, but it's also a very small, tiny fraction of the economy. And we've talked about more broadly, we're losing jobs in retail. There's a lot of heartache, I think, in many industries around automation and what technology is going to do to our workforce. I mean, what would you guys like to see in that area? I mean, is this focus on coal from where you sit in California a little misplaced, or do you think it's fair?
No, I think that the focus on coal jobs fits into Trump's larger narrative that we need to reinvigorate our country's economy, and we need to be focusing on niche industries as well as national industries. Every single American's job matters. It's not just the industries that are popular on the West Coast and East Coast. It's not just tech. And so I think with Trump's tax plan that he just rolled out, we see a large priority placed on ensuring that businesses have an incentive to bring their money back to this country to employ American workers, lowering the corporate tax rate to incentivize businesses to want to grow. And so ultimately, going back to the America First and fixing America's systemic problems, Donald Trump is placing his largest focus on ensuring the quality of life of Americans. And that ranges from safety to jobs to the economy to foreign policy, lots of different areas of practice. And so I don't think that his focus on coal is limited in scope. I think it's one piece of a larger picture that we're seeing.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I grew up in Ohio. And when you're in that part of the world, like Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, as recent as 10 years ago, 40% of their energy was coming from coal-powered electricity plants or electrical plants. I used to have conversations with Californians that we have to shut down coal. It's a dirty energy. I'm saying, do you know what will happen to the economy and to people who actually have snow in the wintertime? You know, how are they going? This is not something that can be done overnight. I think he figured that out.
So one area that he has not been able to tackle yet is health care reform. And I know that you've been involved in the Republican Party for a long time. That was a big thing that both congressional members and he ran on. Yeah. Are you disappointed? Do you think that's going to happen?
Oh, I do think it's going to happen. I think just they're very excited, it seems to me, in Washington just today as we speak, because they are putting together an agreement between the two different groups, the moderate Republicans and the Freedom Caucus conservatives. So I think we won't have a vote this week in the 100 days cycle, but I think a week from now maybe, or 15 days from now.
Great. Before we go, I want to ask each of you, what impact have you felt in your life since Donald Trump was elected and became president? Is there anything you can point to that you are already feeling?
Well, I honestly, I feel better about the economy, just, you know, looking at from a national perspective. It excites me to see what, you know, the changes in our national security, that he's putting more emphasis on keeping America safe. Those things they've always been appealing to me, and they're exciting. I'm excited to see this.
Claire?
I'm very hopeful. I'm very encouraged, and I'm inspired. And I'm graduating from undergrad in 2 weeks, so I'm entering into the job market. And I'm feeling a little bit more confident that there's going to be a place for me in the emerging American economy, especially with, as I mentioned, the new tax plan that just came out. So I'm feeling very excited, and I'm very happy.
And how about you, Sue?
Jobs and the economy is probably the #1 issue for most Americans across the country. And if we don't get some growth back into the economy, and we've been, you know, muddling along or muddling through at 1%, 2% growth, if we don't do better than that, people like Claire aren't going to be able to find jobs.
So are you guys on board with this tax proposal he rolled out? I know it's a little skimpy on details still, and we're waiting to see kind of if he has cuts to offset what he's proposing. Otherwise, it would add massively to the deficit.
Yeah.
Is that a concern?
Well, they still have to work out some wrinkles. For example, the border adjustment tax is a big issue as far as revenue producing on the tax whatever tax legislation comes out. And I understand there's a lot of Republicans who don't like it in the Senate, probably won't vote for it. So they do have to work out a few more things.
Corinne, I mean, again, you're a businesswoman. Are you happy to see these proposals to really slash business taxes?
I am. You know, California, I recently read an article about the 50 worst cities in America to do business, and California was home to 5 of those cities. So for someone like me, I hope that, as a business owner, I hope that these cuts really help my fellow small business owners, because I think that we get forgotten a lot. We are a big contributor when it comes to being job creators.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I mean, the corporate tax rates cuts or proposals are huge, but so are ones for sole proprietors, people like yourself.
Right. Yes.
People like Donald Trump, too.
Right. Well, since the wealthy pay most of the taxes, there's going to be, if there's a cut in tax rates, the wealthy are going to get some of those cuts, you know. But they did change. There's a couple of things that they're changing at the lower end that are going to help middle-class families as well. Larger deduction, what do you call the deduction? It's the general, yeah.
Standard deduction?
Standard deduction, yes. Thank you. I couldn't remember the phrase. This larger standard deduction, higher levels before you get to have to pay taxes. So there's going to be some changes there, too.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming in. It's been fabulous talking to you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks for having us.
In addition to climate change, healthcare is a key issue here in California. Let's take a look at the timeline for those 2 issues. On day 56, President Trump proposed cutting the Environmental Protection Agency's budget by 31%.
On day 64, Trump's effort to dismantle Obamacare failed to get enough support from Republicans to pass.
Obamacare is the law of the land. It's going to remain the law of the land until it's replaced. We did not have quite the votes to replace this law. And so, yeah, we're going to be living with Obamacare for the foreseeable future.
On day 68, Trump signed an executive order to roll back Obama-era climate regulations.
We are lifting job-killing restrictions on the production of oil, natural gas, clean coal, and shale energy. And finally, we are returning power to the states where that power belongs.
Last Saturday, the March for Science was held in hundreds of cities around the world. In San Francisco, roughly 50,000 people took to the streets in peaceful protest. We met up with one young researcher who helped organize that event. For him, it was all about standing up for the value of science to benefit people's everyday lives.
I love science for the uncertainty. I love science because of the unknown. Without science, I don't think I would have the purpose that I have currently in life. We should all care about science and how it impacts us in our everyday life. My name is Robin D. Lopez. I'm 28 years old, and I work as a research associate at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. I study how water resources are affected by climate change. I'm one of 12 siblings. I have 8 sisters and 3 brothers. I'm the first in my family to graduate college. I was recently awarded the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship. Essentially, that will allow me to pursue my goals to become a scientist, as it will cover majority of the costs and expenses associated with doctoral studies. As an aspiring scientist, I'm most concerned with Donald Trump's rhetoric against climate change.
With today's executive action, I am taking historic steps to lift the restrictions on American energy, to reverse government intrusion, and to cancel job-killing regulations.
Climate change is real. The data is there. For our society to be told that we should go back on years' worth of research and effort to combat climate change and to mitigate what we have done is beyond me. Personally, I feel that science is under attack like never before. I feel that if we play on the sideline and don't take action, it could be disastrous for our economy, for our role as a world leader, and for our educational system. I'm helping to organize the March for Science in San Francisco. The March for Science is a global movement for people to show and express their support for science at more than 500 locations throughout the world. Not just San Francisco, we're talking France, Germany, Canada, and Mexico. All right, we have March for Science SF coming up this weekend. Brian, you got numbers on projected attendance numbers?
So we are expecting 13,500 people confirmed. We have another 17,500 people that are interested.
I sit on the steering committee as a social media lead, where I'm active on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and other social media platforms to try and get the word out. All right, so does anyone else have any ideas for a marketing strategy on social media for March for Science SF?
It's not about everybody coming, it's about the individuals that are marching. And the more we highlight those individual stories, the better, I think the better message that comes across for what's at stake.
Mm-hmm. Trump rhetoric against undocumented persons and immigrants has greatly crippled the scientific community. Time and time again during our planning effort, we had many great speakers potentially lined up, many great volunteers who wanted to participate, but turned away out of fear of what may happen to them and their career if they are caught participating due to their status. And with my participation in the March for Science San Francisco, I hope that I can be a voice for them. All right, everyone, thank you for hopping in on this call for March for Science SF social media. Let's make this as visible as possible. Let's have fun, too.
See you on Saturday.
See you on Saturday, man.
Thanks, Robin.
This is my first time participating in such a political activity. Walking with other marchers and supporters of science, it's something I never thought I'd have to do. But knowing that I was a part of that and knowing that I helped bring people together, it brings me much pride and joy, knowing what I'm capable of doing, not just in science, but in policy. Looking forward to these next 4 years under Donald Trump, I do still hope that progress can be made. However, that doesn't mean we should take the back seat and hope for the best. We need to encourage action, and we need to continually encourage action over these next 4 years.
For a broader perspective now, let's check in with our reporters around the state and talk about what they're hearing in their regions. We'll begin with Vanessa Rancaño, our Central Valley reporter, who joins me from Fresno. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, farms in the Central Valley rely heavily on immigrant labor. So what are you hearing from people about President Trump's positions on immigration?
Right. Well, take these numbers with a grain of salt, but the official figure from the USDA is that 50% of crop workers in the United States are undocumented, but experts say that that's probably higher in California, and 70% is a better estimate. So when Donald Trump came to meet with farmers in the Central Valley last spring, they raised this issue with him, and what he told them was, yes, there's going to be a border wall, but there's going to be a door in that wall. And a lot of those farmers voted for him. So they're basically trusting that he's going to make good on that promise.
And do you think that trust is still in place now, 100 days into the administration?
There's just a tremendous amount of uncertainty. I think some people are more hopeful than others. Farm workers certainly are extremely frightened.
And there's been a fear that raids of farms will happen. Are you seeing any evidence of that?
There are always rumors among farm workers, but neither advocacy groups nor farmers have actually reported any raids up till now. What I have heard is that individual workers have been picked up, sometimes on their way to work.
In the agricultural industry, there's something called the H-2A program, which allows agricultural employers to bring in seasonal workers. What is happening with that program right now, and are there enough agricultural workers right now for the Central Valley?
Most farmers here would tell you that there are not enough workers, and that's been the case for a few years, but it seems to be getting worse. Border security has gotten tighter over the last few years. The economy was not great here for a while, so fewer people are crossing the border illegally to work in fields here, and the workforce that is here is getting a lot older. So all that has pushed wages for farm workers up a lot. And even so, farmers say they can't get the workers they need.
Also wanted to ask you about sanctuary cities. There are a number of them in the Bay Area, but in Fresno, the county sheriff there is actually taking an opposite approach. She's cooperating with ICE.
That's right. In 2015, she basically invited ICE into the jail. She's given them full access to the jail's database. She allows them to come in and interview people several times a week, and ICE has taken more than 300 people into custody through this program. Now, the sheriff says that this is about keeping the community safe and keeping dangerous people off the streets, but immigrant rights advocates say that programs like this actually deter immigrants from cooperating with local law enforcement, and that people who haven't actually been convicted of a crime can end up getting deported.
Okay, an interesting perspective from the Central Valley. Thanks to Vanessa Rancaño, our Central Valley reporter, joining us from Fresno.
Thanks, glad to be here.
We go now to our Southern California Bureau Chief, Stephen Cuevas, who joins me from Los Angeles. Well, what are you hearing and seeing from people in Southern California about how Donald Trump's first 100 days are going?
Well, as you probably already know, it's not exactly Trump country down here, though he does have pockets of support, I'd say in Orange County, parts of inland Southern California as well. Local leaders here in LA, City of LA, County of LA, have actually put forward policies meant to sort of counteract any negative effect that may come from policies, especially when it comes to the issue of immigration. So even before President Trump was sworn into office, LA was kind of moving forward with plans that would essentially help shield immigrants, if you will. There's also been a lot of street demonstrations, both for and against, though mostly against, and we'll have a big one on Monday, on May Day, around the issue of immigration and in support of the contributions that immigrants make to the LA region.
So you said that there are some policies there already to shield immigrants, the way you put it. Is Los Angeles, though, an official sanctuary city? Has it declared itself as such?
Not by definition, and it's never taken any sort of vote to declare itself as such. But local law enforcement leaders have made very clear that they don't want officers or deputies to essentially become like de facto immigration and customs enforcement officers. They will turn over, for example, jail inmates if there's a warrant, but they typically do not hold inmates beyond their release date unless there's some serious felony involved. And again, as I said, the city and the county have created an Office of Immigrant Affairs and created a program to help immigrants have easier access to legal aid as well. You could take all of that and say LA is a sanctuary city, but it has not declared itself as such.
What are some of the other key issues that Southern Californians are concerned about?
Well, homelessness continues to be a perennial, and Mayor Garcetti especially has really kind of put this forward as one of the most important issues facing Los Angeles. Locally and the county level, there was overwhelming support for a bond measure and for a county tax hike, money from which would go towards additional housing and other services targeting the homeless. So voters have made it very clear that it's a top priority for them as well. But there's some concern that with a new HUD chief coming in, Ben Carson, that some of the federal monies that the city and the county gets to help support these and other programs could be affected, because he's made it pretty clear that, you know, he's skeptical at the very least of a lot of public assistance programs.
All right, and that is the view from Southern California. Stephen Cuevas, thanks so much for joining us from Los Angeles.
Good to see you.
All right, and now let's go to our Sacramento politics and government reporter, Katie Orr, who joins me from Sacramento. Hello to you, Katie.
Hello.
Well, we just heard Stephen Cuevas talk about the street protests that have been happening, but in the state legislature, lawmakers are really waging their own war against President Trump's policies?
Yeah, that's right. And that's largely come in the form of legislation. Perhaps the most high-profile bill we've seen is SB 54, which would essentially make the entire state a sanctuary state, meaning local law enforcement agencies couldn't use their resources to help federal immigration officials with deportations. We're also seeing a couple of bills related to a potential border wall. One would prohibit the state from awarding contracts to companies that help build the wall, and another would encourage the state's retirement agencies, CalPERS and CalPERS, to divest from companies that participate in building the wall.
And also a bill on data privacy, right?
Yes, there is a bill that would limit the information that state agencies collect to only the essential information they need to process applications. And that is meant to ensure that the state doesn't have more data than it needs, so that if the federal government comes looking for kind of specific data, the state wouldn't even have it to give to them.
So we've got a lot going on from lawmakers regarding immigration issues, but Governor Brown seems to have his own agenda when it comes to the Trump administration.
Yeah, that's right. Governor Brown certainly has made protecting the climate a hallmark of his term in office, and we have seen him ramp that up since President Donald Trump took office. Governor Brown has reached out to different governments around the world, big and small, and encouraged them to join in with him in keeping the global temperature increase down. And we're seeing this at a time when the federal government is moving away from climate protection policies. For instance, President Trump just signed an executive order that would allow for more offshore oil drilling, and we saw Governor Jerry Brown come in with a statement opposing that executive order. And furthermore, the governor says he will visit China in June to talk about environmental protection.
So what can we expect then to see in California during the next 100 days of the Trump administration and for the rest of the year?
I think what we really have to look for in the immediate future is how the federal budget is going to impact the state. California's budget is due in June. And for instance, if Donald Trump and the Republicans are successful at repealing or overhauling the Affordable Care Act, that could have big financial implications for California.
And Katie, we have a situation now in California where both houses of the legislature are led by Latino men. We've got Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon and also Senate President Pro Tem Kevin Dhillon, both Democrats from Los Angeles. How does that shape what is coming out of the legislature in regards to what's as a response to what's coming out of Washington?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of these lawmakers are second-generation Hispanic Americans. Their parents were immigrants, they were farm workers, they were housekeepers, they had come from low-income families. And so we're seeing people like Speaker Rendon and President Pro Tem Dhillon have a lot of empathy for the immigrant community and the Hispanic community in particular, and I think we're seeing that in their legislation.
All right, Katie Orr, thank you for joining us from Sacramento.
You're welcome.
And that is it for our special program in the first 100 days of the Trump administration. For more of our coverage, go to kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Thank you for joining us.